It's an honor to be here. So I'll be telling all of you two stories, talking to you about how these stories have been formative in my understanding of how to follow Jesus, both in this cultural moment and particularly in workplaces that are experiencing division or stratification. So the stories I'm going to tell you start back in 2015 when I was entering a social impact role in the lead up to the 2016 election. And for those of you who are attending from America, you probably remember how polarized and how charged of a time that was. And I think that was especially true for people who are working adjacent to government roles or anything that felt remotely political. And so in that context, I was frequently thinking about the ministry of reconciliation referenced in 2 Corinthians 5, which Nicole also just spoke to. And I was constantly asking the Lord how I could possibly embody that ministry. And so as I was in pursuit of trying to understand how I could embody the ministry of reconciliation in such a charged moment, I also saw God begin to lovingly expose the ways in which I was not seeking a gospel vision of reconciliation. And I saw him inviting me to a deeper understanding of his vision of peace. So now I'm going to tell you a story about me, which is not cute, but you'll get to know me and get to know the situation a little bit better. At the time, I was in a nonprofit where there was also some visible stratification in terms of roles, pay, and ethnic identity among the people in the organization. So one day I decided to talk to a supervisor about this. And I thought that they would receive my feedback gladly, but if they did not. And because I was so sure that I had the moral high ground in terms of both the mission of our organization and in terms of what I believe to be right via the gospel, I was aggressively pursuing my point. And I thought I was right. I still think I was right, technically. But as I was riding the BART home, I felt the Lord begin to speak to me and convict me. And the first thing I felt was that he was asking me whether I had noticed how I was feeling during that conversation. And I felt him pointing specifically to how much I wanted to prove that I was right and how much I wanted to show the other person they were wrong. And then I furthermore felt him showing me that that desire to be right, to show that I have the high ground, was the motivating desire behind my actions. Maybe a stronger desire than a hope to share the kingdom. And then I felt the Lord speak to me about how Jesus himself describes his kingdom and his kingship when he says that he is not like earthly kings and that he comes not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. As I was praying about this verse, I also felt the Lord begin to speak to me about what lies at the root of all the injustices and divisions that I claim to hate and that I say I'm working to eradicate. I felt that he was speaking to me about how everything that has given rise to, whether it's been legal segregation in the United States and the after effects of it, whether it's just like a toxic workplace, whether it's an exploitative relationship, all these things have the same root, which is pride, which is the belief that we get to exalt ourselves over a fellow brother or sister made in the image of God so that we can advance ourselves. And I felt that he was saying that the thing I was feeling during that conversation that was moving me to try to prove a point that seems so noble and moral and even Christ-like, the thing that was moving me was pride. And that even if I had won the argument, even if I had generated some kind of peace through providing a solution to that crisis, whatever I offered would be a temporary peace or even just a cosmetic and superficial one if it was not rooted in the gospel vision of reconciliation. So clearly I had a lot to learn, but I didn't know where to go from there. So I'll give you some backstory to me arriving at this job. Shortly before I took this role, which was in workforce development that targeted young people from non-traditional backgrounds, whether it was because of their educational background or if they had a history with the carceral system, et cetera. At the time, a friend had prayed for me and said that she saw me going to my job and she saw this banner behind me that says, "The kingdom of heaven is here." And that sounded pretty good to me. I prayed about that too. And I thought, okay, maybe this means around me, there's going to be some clear transformation of the office culture. Maybe some people are going to want to receive the gospel. Maybe there's even going to be increased professional favor for me. Maybe I'm going to get promoted. I don't know what this means, but it sounds good. But as time went on, I began to really wonder when this banner that was supposedly behind me that someone had seen in prayer, when this banner was going to manifest itself. So against this backdrop of me wondering, A, when am I going to see the kingdom? B, if what I'm doing is not reconciliation, then what is? Another situation began to unfold at my office. So again, I was in workforce development, connecting young people with internships at Fortune 500 companies. And one day, a young client who was new to the program came into the office and began to publicly and verbally criticize me in front of my managers and my team in terms that were very gendered and misogynistic. And I was so hurt and shocked. And after that was over, I was like trying to avoid him. And of course, I was assigned to manage him. And as I was case managing him, he earned a competitive internship at a tech company in downtown San Francisco. It was a very high profile role that was hopefully going to open up a door for more young people from his background to also take on roles at the company. But then I got a phone call one day asking me to manage a crisis situation because apparently his supervisor had been making intensely racist jokes and remarks at this young intern's expense. And it had become so toxic for him that he was considering leaving the team. And my supervisor asked me to just please go and take care of the situation, because if he left the role, it would potentially endanger many more roles for other young people who also really needed the jobs. So I was struggling with the situation for multiple reasons. The simplest being that I just felt embarrassed because of our previous interaction, and I didn't want to go visit him again at his workplace. But I thought back to something that my husband had actually shared with me, because he's also done work in similar settings. And one thing that my husband frequently says is, my job isn't to judge people, but to make it easy for them to choose righteousness. So I'll say it again because I like that phrase so much. My job isn't to judge people, but to make it easy for them to choose righteousness. And so as I prayed, I felt the Lord emphasize how important it was for me to understand my role, not necessarily as defined by the organization of my culture, but to understand that for him, reconciliation means that I'm going to go into that role and relinquish my right to judge people, to ask the Lord to make clear his perspective on the situation, and to then lay myself down as a stepping stone so that people can make a step towards what is good. So I connected with this young person's social worker who let me know, who knew about the situation where he had criticized me. And one thing that she shared was that he'd been having an extraordinarily hard transition out of foster care. And the difficulty of that transition also came from the fact that many adults had made promises to him around housing, around caring for him and his family. And all of those promises had fallen through. And she said, yeah, maybe it wasn't right for him to yell at you, but at that day when he came in, he was going through so much where he had been let down by many adults. And so as I prayed about the situation, I was like, well, obviously it wasn't right for him to yell at me, but he's a young person trying to do the right thing. And for me to embody the ministry of reconciliation to him right now, if I am to make it possible for him to make a righteous decision, the most important thing for me to do right now is just to show up for him and do my best work. And so when he and I had to sit down, I just let him know that he didn't have to do anything except show up and continue doing his job, and that I was going to continue showing up until the whole situation was resolved. But as I dug into the situation, I became further more reluctant to work with it, because the more I learned about the supervisor and the extent to which she had been bullying and mistreating this young person, the more offended and irritated I was by her behavior, and I had zero compassion. But eventually I did go to her office and walked around and met her. And what I couldn't have seen from keeping her at a distance was that she was a young woman of color tasked with managing a technical team that was almost entirely male. And how, while this didn't justify or diminish the harm of her behavior, this was a dynamic in which she was constantly asserting her dominance in ways that were toxic and harmful. And so when she and I had sat down, we both knew why I was there. And furthermore, I think she was in a hard place too, because she knew that she had done something wrong and that she was going to potentially lose this intern. And this intern had been hand selected by her CTO. And so I could see that she was afraid. And in that moment, as I was praying, I felt again the Lord just speaking to the fact that my job is to lay myself down, not to judge, but to help people make a step towards righteousness. And so rather than my initial instinct, which was to go off on her, the conversation was focused on how to coach her, to not tell her that she was doing a terrible job, but to acknowledge that there was a challenge that she needed to solve, but to give her a compassionate conversation about how to undo the harm she had caused, and fix the situation. And now for me, as this conversation continued, I realized that this was it. This is the moment where there's a banner behind me saying the kingdom of heaven is here. Not because I was being promoted, not because anyone even saw the conversation that was happening or even really cared, but the kingdom of heaven was manifesting because I was humbling myself. I was surrendering to the Lord, my desire to judge people, my desire to say that I knew what was right, my desire to go with the impulse to feel that I had a moral high ground, but asking the Lord to shape my perceptions and asking him how I could lay myself down so that people could make a decision towards what was good and what was needed. So I think that when we follow Jesus's way, it does bring about reconciliation, even if it's not the kind of reconciliation that we expect or can expect to have recognized. I think he just truly means it when he says that he is a servant of all and that his ways can look foolish, or they can even be things that are not seen as valuable in mainstream workplace cultures. And they may or may not win you any recognition, but it's the only way to pursue heaven on earth. So I want to leave you with a concluding thought that throws us way, way back, further back than 2015, to say that for Jesus, when he came for his earthly ministry, he was born into a time that was even more violently divided than ours, more toxic, more stratified by ethnicity, gender, or class, in ways that we can't imagine, in ways that we can't even conceive of probably in a modern workplace or community. Just to give you some context, when you think about the rulers that preceded Jesus by only a generation or overlapped with him, these were people like Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Caesar Augustus, all of whom were trying to build a kingdom that was able to encompass difference and unified under a single authority. But their methods of doing so were based on force, erasing difference, or manipulating people to get along with one another. And then Jesus arrives. And his method of unification is to show that pride and exaltation will stop with him. Pride and self-exaltation will stop with him. And he will create a unified kingdom by setting a precedent of sacrificial love. And this isn't a soft, passive thing, like I'm just going to go to my workplace and be really nice. It's about revealing where we are choosing selfishly and helping us to choose a better way. So my invitation to you is to understand that stewarding the ministry of reconciliation will require us to do two acts of reconciliation. One is to invite the Holy Spirit to show us how we need to be reconciled to the kingdom of heaven ourselves. And then we need to ask ourselves and ask those around us how we can help people in our spheres of influence to choose righteousness. Thank you.